Okay, it's 7:30, so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. And I'm Margaret Brill. I'm co-chair of the Thursday Evening Program Committee. Our speaker, Jamie Cox, is a native North Carolinian, corporate lawyer, and current chair of the Orange County Board of Elections. He has served on that board in various capacities since his first appointment in 2011, and he's still on his feet, more or less. He lives on a mini farm in Hillsborough with his family, their dogs, a cat, and more than a few chickens. Over to you, James.
Okay. Thanks, Margaret, and thanks everybody for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will tell you that if you are seated somewhere that does not have a little card with a colored number on it, that's fine, but we're going to play a gerrymandering game later on in the program, and you'll have more fun if you had a voter information card, and that goes with the seats. So if anybody wants to adjust where they're sitting, there's some more up here, and some over here. You'll have fun either way. No, it goes with the seat. It goes with the seat. I don't have the technological ability to make those kinds of changes on the fly. It's all pre-baked into the PowerPoint.
I told you we were an undisciplined bunch, didn't I?
It is fine. So, thanks everybody for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hopefully this will be a fun dialogue. Feel free to ask questions. I may not know the answer to them, but I did want to start. Is this too loud? I feel like I'm echoing. It's good? Okay. So I did want to start just sort of generally about voting to sort of get us in the framework and the mindset of what it means when we have voting regulations, what it means when we have voting districts, what it means when we change those districts or those regulations, and how that may have an impact on what we do. I then want to sort of talk a little bit about voting in North Carolina and in Orange County in particular. And I happen to know that this is I'm going to go to my next slide actually, because I happen to know that this is a very active group of voters, and so for that we thank you. Carol, which is part of the Weaver Dairy Satellite Precinct, consistently the highest percentage turnout in Orange County and one of the highest precincts in the state of North Carolina, so thank you. I will try not to keep this, I'll try to keep it at your level. If I'm too basic, you guys just tell me, like we already know all of this, we've been doing this. So, and then we're going to get into some of the history of the changes. There have been a lot of changes to voting regulations in North Carolina, both from the legislature and in the courts, which have had a lot of impact on what we do at the Board of Elections. And then we're going to talk a little bit about gerrymandering. Finally, we're going to play a game where we gerrymander the room into different districts. And have different requirements, and if you have a voter information card, you'll be able to see how those requirements might impact you and your party. So that should be interesting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about alternatives and have a dialogue. And Margaret, I can't remember, are we doing is this an hour? An hour, okay. Leaving plenty of time for questions. So I did want to start out by saying that I have been on the board since 2011. I've been a member of the board. I've been secretary of the board. I've been chair of the board in Democratic majorities, in Republican majorities, and for a very odd time where there was no majority. And one of the things that I pride myself on, in addition to the amazing staff that we have here in Orange County, we do have 5 professional staff people who make the job really, really easy, is that we are really collaborative in Orange County at the Board of Elections. It's not the case in other counties. When we go to statewide conferences, we see that a lot of our peers in other counties they're contentious, they don't get along, they don't work well together. I was really proud recently that somebody came up to me after one of our meetings and said, I wasn't able to tell which members were Democrats and which members were Republicans. I was actually really proud of that. I'm a Democrat. I was appointed by the governor, and I'm very proud to be a Democrat. But in the role, it's weird because it's a political appointment to a position in which you have to be nonpartisan. We work for all of the voters in Orange County, and honestly, in my capacity as the chair of that board, I am so excited to have anybody and everybody in the county voting. So that is truly, we want it to be free, fair, easy, and accessible for everybody. But let's back up a little bit and talk about voting. When I give this presentation or a version of this presentation to middle school students, I like to start out by asking them who should be able to vote. So I'm going to ask you, who should be able to vote? Everybody, all citizens. Okay, we've already got an age limitation, so we've gone from everybody to a subset of everybody to a further subset of everybody. So then the kids are always, at the beginning, they're always like, yeah, everybody should vote. And I say, that's awesome. How about babies? And then they think, oh, and they kind of laugh, and they're like, yeah, no, babies. So, all right, so we need an age requirement. So then there's a minimum age to vote. Should there be a maximum age to vote? Okay. I anticipated that response from this group. But it's interesting because some of the school kids are like, maybe. So that's something, right? Okay, that's one of the basics. Citizens, right? So people who are citizens of the United States, residents of Orange County. We administer elections at the county level in North Carolina, so people who should vote in Orange County should live here. What? Sane? I was going to say, what about stupid people? Right? Like, what about stupid people, right? So that's just, it's really hard, right? Because you want people to think like, you want them to be able to have the ability to, to cognitively understand what they're doing. But then you start to think, okay, like, so how do you establish that, right? Do we have a reading test? Do we have a literacy test? Okay, that's starting to get a little tricky. What about, felons, people who have committed a crime. What about people who have committed a crime? So it is not the case universally that if you have committed a crime, you are sort of excluded from participating in the democratic process. That is the case here for certain types of crimes. So think about that. Like, what kinds of crimes are of such a nature that it should exclude you from casting a ballot for participating in the democracy? Because really, when you think about it, in a democracy, in a representative democracy, or in a democratic republic, it's really a manifestation of our individual will at the collective level, right? We're electing representatives that we want to vote like us, that we want to think like us. So I think it's pretty clear that we can very easily get into this sense of, okay, well, yeah, everybody, maybe not everybody, maybe just people who think like me. What about Methodists? I mean, should Methodists be able to vote, or Episcopalians? I mean, right, so it's like you start to think of all the different subcategories of the way that we arrange ourselves in a society, and should that have an impact? What about people who have, given aid or comfort to an insurrection against the United States government? That's interesting. I think that's going to be decided by the Supreme Court soon. But in our past, right, there have been certain restrictions on who could vote. Women, I mean, I think we'll all agree women should be able to vote. That's not always been the case. Property owners. Right? Should it be just property owners or people who have certain levels of wealth? So we're starting to get the sense of the fact that this is actually fluid, and that the rules that we've set as a society have a basis in logic, in reason, sometimes in something else. A lot of the regulations that we see have a basis in racism or ageism, or something else. So we need to be very cautious when we're determining who can vote and when and where, that we are allowing equal access to the ballot. The other principle I think we need to talk about is it's pretty universally accepted: one person, one vote, right? So I shouldn't be able to go in and cast 5 ballots when you can only cast 1. So that's a sort of foundational principle. It's ingrained actually in the North Carolina Constitution. And it should be alive. Excellent. I agree. We have all of those cemeteries casting ballots. That's not a good thing. That actually doesn't happen in Orange County. I was asked to speak very briefly to the way that we administer elections in Orange County. We do have a professional staff. They're full-time staff in Hillsborough. And then we have seasonal workers that are paid to be precinct officials in the early voting period and during our election day. We have 40 precincts in Orange County. All of those are paid workers. They are trained by our staff. We're very fortunate in Hillsborough or in Orange County that we have not had the kind of, with limited exceptions, we have not had the kind of contentious, threatening environment. We have really active and engaged stakeholders in this community that are poll monitors, that are outside workers, that are electioneers, that are greeting people at the polls, people who are there with their political party or with a campaign. With very rare exceptions, it all goes really smoothly in Orange County, and I'm very proud of that. We have a really excellent relationship with law enforcement. We have, our director has essentially a task force that meets in advance of every election to make sure that we have an emergency response program in place. So if somehow you have found yourself not involved in the process, I would encourage you to do that. I was asked at dinner if I've ever received any threats. I know that some election officials have in other parts of the country. I have not. So knock on wood. But it is a great county in that we have an abundance of resources, people who are engaged and involved and interested, and it's also pretty collaborative. I don't necessarily agree with everything that my fellow board members think, but we treat each other with respect, and we know that we're all there to work for the voters. So again, I'm pretty proud of that in this county. All right, so we've talked a little bit about voting generally. We've talked a little bit about voting in North Carolina. It's administered by a state board of elections, which appoints the county boards of elections. They are evenly split, those boards, between the 2 major parties, Democrats and Republicans. And then the chair is appointed currently by the governor. We're going to talk a little bit about the changes that have occurred recently and how there is legislation that was adopted but is pending in litigation that would change the constitution of the county boards of election to evenly split between the 2 major parties so that you would have 4 members and no majority. Part of the problem with that, I'll just go ahead and talk about it. Part of the problem with that is that if you don't have a majority, then there is no action taken. And if there is no action taken, there's no guidance in the statute, for example, on breaking a tie, or what you do if, for example, you're voting on an early voting plan. And in the absence of action by the county board, it goes to the state board, which would be evenly divided without a majority if this law is enacted or is allowed to go through. If the state board doesn't act, then it goes to the legislature, and they get to decide. So that is one way to do it. It's not the way that it's been done historically, and I don't think it's necessarily the best way to do it. One of the things, just going back to the example of an early voting plan, by statute, if you do not have a unanimous vote for your early voting plan in your county, you default to the statutory minimum, which is that your Board of Elections office is open during business hours during the week and from 8 to 3 on the last Saturday of early voting. So in Orange County, we have 6 early voting sites historically in major elections. If we were to go to 1, our 110,000 voters, between 2/3 and 3/4 of which tend to vote early, would all have to go to Hillsborough. If we're in Charlotte or Raleigh, where they only have 1, you can imagine that would be an issue. So to me, that is one of the biggest concerns about that legislation, is that it's not, we're a very collaborative board, and yet, if there's no guidance on how to break ties, then you can't function. So that's a problem. I'm sorry? I can't speak to the legislative intent, but it would seem like that might be part of the motivation. If you have, so a lot of legislation, and we'll talk about this, we'll talk about this now, some of the recent changes. And just to back up and give a little context, North Carolina was one of the states that was required by the Voting Rights Act to have pre-clearance, to have pre-authorization by the Department of Justice for any changes to our voting laws. That requirement went away when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Shelby versus Holder that was no longer required. I'm not a litigator. There are probably folks in the room who could speak much more articulately to the rationale behind that decision. But the way I read it, it was essentially like, hey, this umbrella has been keeping us dry and doing a really great job. So, since we're dry, we don't need this umbrella anymore. It's still raining, so you're probably going to get wet. But with that sort of pre-clearance requirement gone, many states, including North Carolina, enacted sweeping voting regulations, which really altered the ability of people to access the ballot. It restricted early voting. It required photo ID. It restricted same-day registration. It had other requirements. It was called sort of a monster voter suppression law by those who opposed it. Essentially, in judicial review, there was an intervening case here, a couple of intervening cases, but then that was overturned by the HB 589, which was the new voting laws in the wake of the Shelby decision. The Fourth Circuit, Federal Court of Appeals, essentially overturned that, said that it was unconstitutionally discriminatory and targeted minority voters with surgical precision. So that's, surgical precision, that was the term that they used. And it was true, it was a very data-driven decision. And the legislative history that was revealed in litigation was that the folks who passed that law sort of evaluated the different tools that people who were in certain communities of color might use, the types of ID that they may or may not have, and it was found to have a disparate impact, significant disparate impact on communities of color. One of the things I should say is that the Republican Party in North Carolina, we talked a little bit of the first in sort of voting generally, like it's a manifestation of your will, right? And it's really about manifesting your will, not just generally, but about resource allocation, right? It's how are we going to divide the resources as a community, as a state, as a civilization. And you can get a lot of people who vote like you to go to the polls and win that way, or you can keep people who don't vote like you, and we listed some of who they were. You can make sure that they don't vote. In North Carolina, the Republican Party, to their credit, has done a really good job at both. They did essentially, and everybody always asks me what more information than I have on this. They essentially did a very data analytics-driven analysis of their registrations, people who were registered Republican in the state. And they cross-referenced that with grocery store data, your MVP card or your VIC card. And they found that 3 items, if purchased in combination, and I don't know what those items were, it was proprietary, I'm sorry. 3 items, if bought in combination, tended to indicate that you were registered Republican. So then what they did was they cross-referenced that same data with people who were not registered, and they contacted them directly and they got them registered and engaged. That's super smart. I mean, that's a really, really excellent thing to do. The Republican majority, and this is not a political statement, these are just facts. The supermajority in North Carolina that came into our legislature in 2010, 2010 was a bad year for the Democrats in North Carolina, supermajorities in both houses of the state's legislature. They did this type of thing as well. So they were engaging voters in their column on the one hand, and they were attempting to restrict voters in the other. Now, one of the reasons or the justifications that they gave was fraud. And I can tell you that in all of the years that I've been doing this, I have seen no cases of in-person voter fraud. It's really difficult to do because of the checks and balances that we have in place. And it would be virtually impossible to do on a large enough scale to make it outcome determinative in an election. It doesn't happen. It's not a thing. So at any rate, so all of these recent changes, and I'll go through some of them quickly so we can get on to other topics. But essentially, we've changed the composition of the Board of Elections, as I talked about. We've changed the rules around early voting. We've changed our maps, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second. Most recently, in 2018, there was a constitutional amendment that passed requiring photo ID. The accompanying legislation for that was held to be unconstitutional again because it excluded vast numbers of people and had a disparate impact on communities of color. Student IDs, for example, were not allowed. So that has a big impact on younger voters who tend to vote Democratic. And interestingly, in North Carolina, your race is actually a better indicator of whether or not you will vote for a Democrat than is your party affiliation. So it is virtually impossible to have a partisan impact that's not also a racial impact in this state. Those decisions, that legislation landed in court. That law was challenged as racially discriminatory. In 2022, the North Carolina Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional. It violated the state's constitutional guarantee of free and fair elections. Interestingly, in 2023, the newly installed North Carolina Supreme Court took the, I think, unprecedented step of rehearing those cases and reversing the prior court's decision. So at this time, we now have a whole host of things back on the table, including voter ID. We talked a little bit about this at dinner. I'm a little less concerned about the photo ID requirement now because, for example, universities can have their IDs registered or authorized, essentially, so everybody at Chapel Hill can use their ID, as their photo ID to vote. Certain tribal IDs were included, and a whole host of other things. So while there will be people who are otherwise eligible to vote who are disenfranchised by this requirement, the number is significantly smaller. The first pass back in 2013, it was estimated would have excluded approximately 500,000 voters in a state that has about 7.2 million voters. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the recent statutes that have made sweeping changes to the way we administer elections. SB 749 is the one I talked about, where we've now changed the composition of the board to 2 members from each party. That is in litigation. There's been a stay. The court has essentially put that on hold. So we'll see what happens. I love this graphic because I don't think people are really aware of the fact that half of North Carolina's voters live in these counties. Half of North Carolina's voters live in these counties. We have long been an agrarian state. When I was growing up here, most people lived outside of cities. That has changed over time. And now more than half of our population live in these counties. 7.3 million registered voters, half of them live right here. So when we think about representation, we would think that half of the representation for our state legislature, or for Congress, would include these counties, logically, if we're one person, one vote. But it doesn't exactly work that way. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We also tend to be a very purple state in North Carolina. We are pretty evenly split in terms of our voting behavior between Democrats and Republicans. Our registration numbers, it's interesting, recently people who are not affiliated with any party became the largest group, the largest single group of voters. So, was there a question? Oh, I'm sorry. So unaffiliated voters are the largest group. The next largest group, at 33% are Democrats, 30% Republican, and then 1% are other parties. You can see that in our last presidential year, the 2020 election, it was really interesting because Roy Cooper was elected governor. Donald Trump got our electoral votes for president, and you can see sort of how those fall along certain lines. The map on the right is by county, and the map on the left is by precinct. But you can see basically the partisan distribution. Blue is affiliated with Democrats, red is Republican. But basically, you can see in the results, it's pretty close. And in most statewide elections in North Carolina, it's pretty close. And this is essentially the distribution of the margins. And so you can see, again, just juxtaposed with the reminder of where our state's population live, that you're going to have larger margins in the counties where the people are, smaller margins in the counties that are more rural. So that's the basic distribution of the vote. Now, when we're sort of thinking about how we would draw those boundaries, there are some in terms of representation and how we want to vote for people who will represent us either in our state government or in our federal government. There are lots of different ways that we could do that, right? Lots of different ways we can draw those boundaries. And that's where we come to the topic of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, most of you probably know, is a term that was coined in the 1800s by a politician who drew a salamander-shaped district for himself. So his name was Jerry, and there's the name. His last name was Jerry. But at any rate, essentially, the practice of gerrymandering is drawing district boundaries in a way that is less about reflecting the accurate or the fair distribution of representation across parties, and more about politicians or parties selecting the representatives in advance. Generally, when we draw boundaries for voting districts, we want them to be of roughly even population, compact size, and fairly geographically centered. We tend to, you're sitting with people that you like, that you know, and so that's how we've arranged ourselves as a community. So that's generally how we want those lines to be drawn. In gerrymandering, though, basically we take the registration or the predictive voting behavior of voters in that area, and we draw lines around them to suit our own purposes, whether that's to exclude certain people or give other people a certain advantage. And you can see sort of by these 4 examples, the way that they've kind of done that is you can have these essentially 50 people in districts that are 100% of one party, or mixed in one party, or sort of, mixed around. And we're going to explore that a little bit more when we play the game. But part of the philosophy is that you do what's called the packing and cracking, where you go ahead and pack voters who vote alike into tight districts, and then you crack those communities. In other words, you divide their voting power among other districts. And in that way, you can sort of manipulate the results. In North Carolina, like with our other voting regulations, there's been a lot of time. We've redrawn our maps in North Carolina a lot over the last several years. This is again, I won't go into all of this litigation, but basically right now, we are looking at congressional maps, for example, that went in 2022 when the when they were court-ordered maps. And North Carolina, of course, has 14 representatives to Congress. Again, blue is Democrat in these maps, red is Republican. In 2022, we had an evenly divided congressional delegation. And if you remember, we talked about the fact that our voting behavior as a state is pretty evenly split. That kind of starts to make sense. I mean, you can sort of think, okay, well, like, what does that mean if you are, a Republican in the deep blue districts or a Democrat in the deep red districts? But overall, it's a fairly fair result. When that was reversed, the new maps came out, and we have now 10 or 11 of our congressional seats will almost certainly go to the Republican candidate, and 3 or 4 of those will go to the Democratic candidate. Now, that's a way to do it, but again, just sort of question to yourself whether that's the right result, whether that's fair. And again, I like to put this map up of where half of our population is, because if you look at these closely, I'm not sure they're representing fairly half of the population. The same thing, this is actually a great map at a county level, which shows you some of that packing and cracking. If you look at, I don't have my pointer, but the District 6, which is the sort of magenta district that goes into Guilford County, and there's a detail of it here. Guilford County is where I grew up. I grew up in this pink part in the corner here, which is High Point. The yellow blob under the word Guilford is Greensboro. If you live in Greensboro, you have, if you live in northern Greensboro, you have a representative whose district is primarily consisting of the border counties and the mountain counties. If I'm running for election in that district, am I going to spend a lot of time in Greensboro? Probably not. So the same thing in other districts, but that's sort of dividing Greensboro, which as a community tends to vote fairly Democratic across 3 different districts. One wonders if that's the most fair or equitable result. Similarly, with our this is our state Senate map. Again, you don't have the colors here of the major parties, but you can see that some of these districts are really, really crazy. Like, how are you going to represent people in this part of Carteret County and then all the way up to Halifax and just north of Franklin County? It doesn't feel like a community, it doesn't feel compact, and it doesn't feel like that folks in that area will have fair representation. So I'm going to pause for a minute because we're going to start the game, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. Are there questions so far? Have I put you all to sleep? Oh, you have to have a microphone. Oh, yeah, and then here.
With the new proposal to have even 2 and 2, does this essentially obliterate the need for and the relevance of county election boards and the state election board? Because if it all goes, if there's a stuck vote every time, the 2 and 2, and it all reverts to the Republican state legislature, we see exactly what that means. So the state board of elections and the county board of elections will essentially be non-functional.
So I think that is certainly a reasonable interpretation. I will say that let's just think about what might be a good outcome of that. At least ostensibly, the law was to encourage collaboration and to take politics out of out of elections. Great. And I think that there would definitely be an incentive to cooperate, to reach consensus. The problem, of course, is that some of the underlying requirements are already tilted towards the preferences of one of the parties, and so if we're negotiating, we're not exactly negotiating on even ground. I don't know that it would be completely obliterated. It would be very challenging. It would be very challenging. Others have argued that in a county like Orange County, where our voter registration is about half Democrats, and maybe, I think, 14 or 15% Republicans, our county politics tend to be dominated by the Democratic Party, whereas in a lot of the rural counties, it's the opposite. Like, we have a hard time, for example, finding poll workers who are registered Republican to work in a lot of our precincts, especially in the southern part of the county. They have the opposite problem in the rural counties, where they have difficulty, finding Democrats. So if I'm at that county, I'm thinking, oh, well, this is great. Why should our Board of Elections be chaired by a Democrat? So, I mean, there are arguments. That said, I share your view that it will be incredibly difficult to get work done in an efficient manner.
When they're drawing these maps, how do they treat or how do they look at independent voters? Or is it even taken into consideration?
That's a great question. And I think it's a really good point that, as we saw in our voter registration statistics in North Carolina, and then just anecdotally, one of my kids is registered Democrat, the other is unaffiliated. They're in their 20s, and a lot of people their age are registering unaffiliated if they register at all, and that is the largest group of people statewide. So what I think the way that the data is analyzed in order to draw the districts is about voting behavior. So where you have voted, or what proclivity you have in that precinct to, what's the margin in that precinct. Because unaffiliated voters are going to vote one way or the other in a general election, and so you're looking at what are the results in that precinct versus what is the registration. If your goal is to give a partisan advantage to your party. Personally, I think that the fact that we see more people registering unaffiliated tends to indicate that people don't necessarily feel comfortable in one party or the other, and they want to make independent decisions, maybe based on the candidate or based on the issue. So for that reason, I think we should be drawing boundaries that better reflect a balance, especially in a state like North Carolina where we're pretty evenly split. So, but it's a great question. Maybe one more and then we'll get into the game. Jane, could we get him?
Well, what are the constitutional requirements that a district has to meet? There must be some, like number of voters. There's no area requirement, I think.
That's right.
And there's some quibble about whether you ought to stick to county boundaries and things like that.
Well, that's right, and in some cases they don't. So because we have the principle of one person, one vote, generally speaking, districts should be of roughly equal population. From other principles, they should be fairly compact. The boundaries should be easily discernible as opposed and simple, as opposed to these sort of long, weird arms. I can't speak to the exact what are the exact requirements in the Constitution. Historically, there's been an attempt to keep counties together. That's, as you can see, not necessarily the case. And it's difficult to do if you are trying to keep them also of equal population, because we live in clumps, right? We don't live evenly distributed across the state, so it's sort of a balancing act.
Jamie, I know the census has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons the census gets controversial sometimes.
Right, so precincts are based on census boundaries, and the population of those census boundaries is used to determine the population of the district. Okay, so we're going to pivot, and we're going to play a little game. where we are going to pretend that there's a world in which there are two parties, and those parties are represented here in the room, and we are going to gerrymander this room. So our two parties are the Golden Cottages parties and the Purple Apartments parties. There's a total population of 52, and you'll notice that they're evenly split. So sort of like North Carolina, we're evenly split, 26 of each parties. What I need you to know for the purposes of the game is that we are trying to determine 5 districts that we're going to put our population into. We would like those districts to be compact, simple shapes, roughly geographical, and equal population if possible. I also need you to know that Purple Party people never vote for Golden Party candidates, and vice versa. So where are my Purple Party people? You guys are so quiet. Purple Party people, come on, like, Purple Party people. You're just like, okay. How about the equal numbers? Where's my Golden Party people? There you go, rowdy. Okay, awesome. So obviously this is made up. But you hate each other for the purposes of this game. Completely hate each other. So there are voter information cards that do not have people in them. Those voters in these results that we'll be seeing are casting their ballots absentee. There are people who do not have voter information cards, and you're not registered. I'm sorry. You're not able to participate. You can watch and hope that the decisions that we make don't have a negative impact on you. I would just encourage you to please register to vote and participate in the process. All right, so again, we have A, B, C, D, and E. These are our principles, and we're gonna divide it up and see what happens. All right, round number 1. We've got 5 districts, and again, this is a pre-baked game, so you can see it's not exactly like the shape of the room, but roughly, we can see, okay, yeah, they're kind of compact. They're here, and here, and here, and there. Margaret, what's your number? Margaret is number 40. 14, okay, so 14. Margaret, you're in District E, and you're a member of the Golden Party. So how are you feeling about your district?
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Pretty
mean, well,
good.
so
yeah, actually, I like it. Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, so you're in the majority in your district,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I mean, so like in any election, the Golden Party, the Golden Cottages are going to crush the purple candidate, right? I mean, you guys are set. Do we have number 16? How are you feeling? So it's a very different place for you, right? Like it's. You can't relate to her at all. Like, and you know going in, right? You know that these are the voter stats in your district. You know, are you even going to vote? Depends what else is happening that day. Exactly. So that's actually it's actually really important. And part of the irrespective of what party you're in, this type of practice has a potential negative impact on people in any party. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. But look at so basically though, within your district, like you feel a certain kind of way depending on your party, but look at the way that the whole room is kind of coming out here. We've got 2 representatives from the Golden Cottages Party. We'll have 2 representatives from the Purple Apartments Party. And then District D is equally divided. So it's going to be based on the candidate, right? How are you guys feeling about that in District D? Who do we have in District D? How are you guys feeling about that? Learn to compromise, right? If I'm a candidate in District D, I better not go too hard on one issue or the other, right? Like I need to make sure that I'm appealing to everybody. So District D is pretty balanced. We kind of like that. So that you're going to actually also be very, very interesting to people room-wide, because we already know what's going to happen in District E. We know what's going to happen in District A. You guys are going to tip the balance. So however this district votes, this is a toss-up district, it's very important. So, all right, so we good with round 1? Let's see what happens in round 2. Okay, round 2, district lines are different. I don't know that we're sticking to our principles here. We don't really have compact districts. The shapes are getting a little funky. Like everybody in District B is now just like on the front row, and you guys may not necessarily have that much in common. How do you guys feel about this? You're split off from the person that you're sitting with, so and the other thing is that in District B, it's evenly split. Like, how is that going to work, right? So, Margaret, how are you feeling about this one? Still feeling pretty good, right? So you're basically, your district is essentially the same, right? So you're doing okay. But if you read your voter information card, you track your number on here, you can see that, in District C, people who are in District C now, how are you feeling? You feel number 25 feels pretty bad. Like, again, if I'm a candidate in your district, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't care what you think, right? I mean, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to knock on your door. Are you going to go to the polls? I mean, honestly, How's everybody else feeling, though? Yeah? All right. So, this purple parties, you're banding together there. So nothing about your own views changed. You didn't move seats. We just moved the boundaries around you, and suddenly you have a different relationship to the results, right? You now have a different opinion, potentially. Not Margaret, she's still good. You have a potentially different opinion. You still feel bad. That's why I say this didn't help you at all, right? And the results are even worse, right? Because if you look room-wide, we now have 2 really solid golden districts. We have a lean golden district, and we have a toss-up district. So, just room-wide, people in the purple party have got to be feeling pretty demoralized right now, right? I mean, this is not just in terms of pure fairness, I don't think you guys are going to feel well represented, right? So, okay. So we've got to pause for a minute because we have a new statute. We have a new requirement. Photo ID is now required to vote in this room. So in the universe that we're voting in, the district lines haven't changed, but we have a new rule. You have to have a photo ID to vote, and it's really important that you have to have a certain kind of photo ID. We only allow certain kinds of photo ID. Anybody feeling happy or sad about that? You're not happy. Why are you not happy? You don't have, so you're in a district that is the majority purple district. You were feeling happy just a minute ago, but now you can't participate. You're like these folks in the back that aren't even registered, right? I mean, you're not able to participate. You were just qualified 5 minutes ago. It's terrible. But, that's how it goes. I wonder what the result looks like. So this is actually the result room-wide. And we can see that the majority of people who do not have the right kind of ID are in the purple party. So that has a big impact not just on this district, but in the results as a whole. We've now gone, you remember for the results, we had, a couple of strong golden party districts. We had 1 strong purple party district. Now we've got it's complete victory, right? A complete rout for the golden party. You guys statewide are doing great. This one rule change gave you a significant electoral advantage. Maybe that was intentional. I don't know. All right. Do what? All that fraud. We're preventing fraud, but we've disenfranchised people who were, just living their lives. All right. Next round, round 3. We've drawn the lines differently again. So these are not compact districts. They're kind of geographical-ish, but check it out, they do not have equal population. Some of these districts are massive, and some of them are not. So if you're in District C, how are you feeling in District C? Yeah? Literally no opposition. Literally no opposition to the Purple Party. It's all you guys. But, yeah, but statewide, you've got no representation, right? You've got one district. You guys are in the only district. So if you're over here and you're in the Purple Party, or you're over here and you're so sorry, we're just beating up on you so hard right now. Like it's. Okay, there you go. Your photo IDs work. That's great. Small victory. But so, you know, I'm just going to say this is probably not the most fair, right? I just feel like this is really not a fair district, unless I'm just like super excited to be in the Golden Party, in which case I think it's awesome. All right. Okay. We're drawing them again. This is round 4. We have new district boundaries. These are not compact. They're not simple shapes. They're not geographically. They're all over the place. They're not equal population. Margaret, how are you feeling? You're still pretty good, right? Yeah, you've got, it's a little bit more of a split, but you're still in the majority in your district. But we've got now, we don't really have any toss-up districts, right? So under these lines, the candidates are pretty predetermined, right? So if you don't vote in your party's primary, you're really not going to have anything to say in the general election. If I'm a candidate that is in a different party than is the majority in your district, am I even going to bother? I don't know, right? And that impacts the statewide results. So let's see. Next round, okay. We've redrawn the districts again. They're not compact. The shapes are not simple. They're all over the place. They do have equal population. And I'm really interested at the district results. Each of these districts, Margaret, how are you feeling now? Right? So you're now in a district where you are no longer, I think for the first time in the game, right? You're not in the majority. Right? You're excited, fair shot. There is not, these districts are hideous, right? They jump rows, they go over, look at District C. Like, that's just crazy, right? That's insane. But if you'll notice, these results might be the most fair in terms of the outcome, because I can't predict, because they're all equally balanced, I can't predict what the outcome is going to be. If I'm a candidate in any of these districts, it's kind of important that I make friends with people in both parties, right? So even though these districts are hideous, maybe they're the most fair districts we've had so far. I don't know. Unfortunately, I do have to tell you that we have another rule change coming. We did talk a little bit earlier about the fact that people who have committed crimes should perhaps not be able to participate in the democracy. My wife would tell you that if you have multiple speeding tickets, you are a menace to the community and you should not be able to participate in this at all. So, we have a new rule. If you have more than 2 speeding tickets in your driving record, I regret to inform you that you are no longer able to participate in the voting process. Margaret, how you feeling? Stay off the road. You know, I don't know what to tell you other than that you're a criminal and you should be shunned. You know, we're not you should have no voice in what goes on. So, how are other people feeling about that? Well, you think that's fair? No? Somebody said no. Who thinks it's fair? Somebody without 2 speeding tickets or more, right? All right. So, like last time, there's actually a disparate impact And you'll notice that this new rule actually has a bigger impact on the Golden Party. And so you look at the results. So we didn't change the district lines. We went from toss-ups in all districts. Because of this new eligibility requirement, Purple Party sweep. You guys have all the districts and the potentially one more. How you feeling now? You're feeling pretty good. This is great. So, right, don't have to, well, you still have to worry about it on the road. You don't have to worry about her in the ballot box. You don't have to worry that her criminal intent will be manifest in voting. Criminal records are public information, and so I think perhaps this new rule was promulgated by the Purple Party, and they were aware that the criminal driving record of people in the Golden Party in this room was such that who's got one speeding ticket? How you feeling? Relieved? I'm going to drive more carefully now, right, too? So, but also, there, but for the grace of God, so how about somebody with, I don't know, I can't remember how many, what's the maximum number of speeding? Who's got like more than 2? You have 6? Margaret, you're a menace. I'm so glad you are no longer participating in this democracy. Well, so you make an excellent argument. What does it have to do with voting? We made the determination, and as we see, it had a major impact on the results. So I do want to hit a couple of things, and we're coming up on the hour. And this goes to the question that was asked earlier. What happens when you're in a situation where there are more than 2 dominant parties? And should we be in a situation that accommodates more than just 2 parties? Should this be something more than binary? Should we have a situation where if I don't align if my values don't align with one party or the other, that I can register for another party that is of similar values and mindset to me and still have an opportunity to meaningfully participate in the process? So a couple of alternatives, and then I do want to make sure people have time for questions, and the game lasts a little longer, so apologies. But so there are several different ways to do it. We saw in North Carolina's congressional districts when there was a court-ordered map drawn, it was equally balanced. So many jurisdictions, many states have adopted nonpartisan districting commissions that are made up of people like on the Board of Elections who are there to represent all parties. Those maps consistently are found to be fair. They are not challenged in court, and they provide much better representation. So we could keep everything like it is and just move the partisan nature of the districting to a nonpartisan role and have a much more fair system. There's also an argument for proportional representation, where you have not necessarily a district around your geography, but you have a certain number of representatives allocated based on the number of people that are registered in your party. They do this in some other countries, and in some counties they vote this way, where if I'm in the Purple Party, I know that I have 30% of the population, so we have 30% of the representatives. Our party gets together, we vote for who those representatives should be, and we send them to the governing council. That doesn't have a lot to do with geography and how we sit together, but it does have more to do with our ideology and may actually be a better system. There is a big push in North Carolina now for ranked choice voting. I will profess not to be an expert on that system of voting, but they do use it in other communities where you have sort of automatic elimination. And what I understand is that often nobody's first choice wins, which seems a little odd to me. But maybe it's a better system for driving consensus, collaboration, and cooperation. So that's my hour-long spiel. We do have like a minute. No questions. We're good.
Should we be concerned about voter purge? I mean, that's happening in some areas. Could that happen to us in North Carolina?
That's a good question. We have a statutory process called list maintenance where we are required to remove voters from our rolls on a periodic basis. The way that we do that is if you haven't presented to vote by any means in 2 presidential cycles, you are moved to inactive, and if you are inactive for an additional cycle, then you are removed from our rolls. That allows us to do things like make sure that we have a very mobile population in Orange County, and people who were here as students and who have moved on are no longer on our voter rolls. So purge is sort of a loaded term, but it's a process that we actually use, but it is highly regulated and transparent. And voters are given the opportunity, for example, to be made aware that they are in inactive status, and our office reaches out to them to let them know. And if you are inactive but you present to vote, then you are automatically put back on to active status. So there are some checks and balances there. But I always recommend that everybody go to the voter lookup tool of the North Carolina Board of Elections. You can look at your name, make sure your registration is correct, make sure your address is correct. Great question.
Maybe if anybody, one more question.
How do you get rid of dead people? We keep getting calls from the Democratic Party for Robert Seymour, who must have died.
So that's a great question. I don't know about the Democratic Party's data process, but in Orange County, we sync our records with Health and Human Services, and we do that periodically, so that when we receive the death certificate or the notification of a voter having passed, they're removed from our rolls.
Okay, I'm going to propose that if anybody has any other questions, you can send them to me, and I will pass them on to Jamie, and I'm sure he will be happy to answer them.
Absolutely. Also, take a look
Yes.
at our website. Orange County's website is available and online, and I will see all of you, because this is one of the precincts that I monitor, on the next election day.
You have to keep a very close eye on us.
I know. Thank you so much for having me and for your attention. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jamie. This is wonderful. Thank you.